All right, so I am delighted to see everybody here tonight. Welcome and thank you for coming to our the Education Voters of PA. A little update on Governor Shapiro's budget proposal, which he made earlier this week. So for anybody who's not familiar with Education Voters, our mission is to ensure that elected officials adopt and implement a pro-public education agenda. And to that end, we advocate for sound education policy, and we build and mobilize the public will to ensure that support for quality public education and an opportunity to learn for all children is a top priority for key decision makers. We have a lot of information on our website if you haven't looked at that yet. And so what we do is we are the only statewide policy and public education policy and advocacy organization. So we do policy work. We work to educate people in our statewide network about issues that impact public education. We train advocates through Zoom and in-person meetings, and we also create fact sheets. We write research briefs that we use to support advocacy efforts, and we really try to help people localize what's happening at the state into their own school districts. So today what we're going to do briefly is we're going to share the landscape that's like kind of behind this budget proposal. We'll share what we know about Governor Shapiro's budget proposal. We'll discuss some advocacy activities, and we'll talk about the plans that we can make together to build support for the funding that our kids need and deserve in Pennsylvania. So the landscape that we're in right now is is something that is very different from what we have seen for many, many years in Pennsylvania. So it is 1 year, yesterday was 1 year since Pennsylvania's school funding system was declared unconstitutional by Commonwealth Court. And it's been a year since the judge ordered the respondents to come up with a plan to fix the unconstitutional system. So the Basic Education Funding Commission in Harrisburg, which was made up of 6 senators and 6 representatives who were Republicans and Democrats, along with 3 representatives from the governor's office. They came together, they met, they traveled the entire state, they listened to people, and they came up with a report for a 7-year plan that would close the $5.4 billion funding gap to reach constitutional compliance. That was passed earlier in January by a vote of 8-7, and that plan right now is the plan that would bring constitutional funding to Pennsylvania. And then we're also in this unusual space for any of us who've been doing this for many years. We have a $14 billion year-end surplus, which includes a $6 billion rainy day fund and an $8 billion year-end surplus. So if anybody's been doing this like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there was no money in Harrisburg. It was kind of inconceivable to think about investing in education because like budgets were papered together. But right now, Harrisburg's sitting on a $14 billion surplus with a B. So that's what's going on in the background of the governor's budget proposal that he made this week. So Governor Shapiro, we're going to go through this kind of like by type of funding. So he proposed basic education funding over $1 billion increase. So the first pot of this $1 billion increase would be about 800 and some million dollars that would be targeted to this adequacy investments. These investments would meet the first year investment of the 7 years that were recommended by the Basic Education Funding Commission to address Pennsylvania's unconstitutional school funding system. And so this is exactly what was recommended in the report. That was what Governor Shapiro put in his budget, which is what advocates had been hoping for. In addition to that, he proposed $200 million that would go out through the basic education funding formula to all 500 school districts. And this is also the investment that follows the recommendation of the Basic Education Funding Commission. In addition to that, these get a little wonky, but it's actually really important. The Basic Education Funding Commission recommended updating the current funding formula so that it would be more predictable and it would offer more stability in the funding. So this includes smoothing the poverty factors that are in the formula so that school districts won't bounce on and off of what we call the poverty cliff. It will make it a lot more predictable. They also proposed resetting the base funding for school districts to what they received in the 2023-2024 allocation. And so that's actually a really big deal for school districts that have declining enrollment that are currently benefiting from what we call the hold harmless piece that is in the current funding system, where there was like a pot of money before the formula was enacted in 2015, and everybody got to keep that funding, whether they lost or gained students. You know, this would really stabilize funding for districts that have lost a lot of enrollment, and it would be like a really, really huge benefit for them. And so with this investment and smoothing the formula and all of that, total funding for basic education from the state would be $8.9 billion. Governor Shapiro's also proposed a $50 million increase in special education funding, which is a 4% increase over last year. That would go out to all 500 school districts through the special education funding formula, which is also, again, based on the actual student population and their needs in the districts. And then, you know, we're going to go through some of the smaller line items here. There was a $2.4 million increase for career and technical education, which is a 2% increase. A $7 million allocation for dual enrollment programs. And then I just want to take a couple of minutes here to talk about what was kind of unexpected and very incredibly welcome in his proposal. Governor Shapiro has proposed establishing a statewide cyber charter tuition rate of $8,000 per student per year. Anybody who's been in the space and has seen like cyber charter school funding issues over the years can see that this is something that makes a lot of sense. Right now, school districts spend between $8,600 and $26,000 per student. They go to the same cyber charter school, they get the same education. And we have just seen that cyber charter schools are just awash in excess funding. So this flat rate is kind of like, if anybody's been following the House Bill 1422 that passed in the House earlier, this is kind of like a half a loaf. It's not like a full fix for the funding system. It does not address the special education issue, but it is a very good loaf, very good half loaf that we would be delighted to see enacted. So it would have a flat rate for regular education, and then the special education supplement would say the same, but then the regular education base would be $8,000. So enacting this reform would save school districts $262 million annually. That is like a lot of money for school districts that they would just not be paying to cyber charter schools, that they would be able to invest in their students. And I have to say, I've had people sincerely ask me, what will this mean for the education of students in cyber charter schools? And so I sincerely answered to them, you know, these cyber charter schools, they might not have money to buy like parade floats. They might not have money to buy like $70,000 headless dogs that they use to promote themselves at other parades. They might not have money to continue building a real estate empire across the state, right? They might not be able to continue buying all of these different buildings and doing that. But when we look at cyber charter finances, when we look at the massive fund balances that they have built up, when we look at the money that they just spend on things that have nothing to do with education, cyber charter schools will be completely fine if they have a flat rate of $8,000 per student. And so then there were some other really beneficial pieces in Governor Shapiro's proposal. He proposed a $300 million what would you call it, a $300 million allocation for environmental repairs for schools. This actually was included for the next 5 years. So this was $300 million this year, and then $300 million for the next 5 years. He also included the $16 million so to be able to maintain the funding initiatives for universal free breakfast that were adopted last year. He included $3 million for school district health services to provide like period products for students at no cost. And this actually, you know, it's not that much money, but it could have a really serious impact on student attendance, because we've seen that nationally many students miss class because they don't have access to menstrual hygiene products. And there will be a way for schools to be able to have these products made available. This budget would continue the safety and security grants, $100 million for mental health, and then $50 million for school safety and security. And that number at the top doesn't match because there's also money for non-public schools in there that would add up to that total at the top. And then there is $28 million in funding to support teacher recruitment and retention and professional development. I don't have a lot of details about that, but if anybody's interested in it, I can get you details. And then there seems to be and again, we don't do a lot of pre-K at Ed Voters, but it seems like this is a very nice and substantial investment in pre-K also. So an 11% increase for pre-K counts, and then an increase for Head Start, and then also an increase for early intervention. There is a new blueprint for higher education and substantial funding increases that Governor Shapiro has proposed. That whole plan to me right now seems very inaccessible. So once we have a better understanding of what that is, we'll write it up and do a post on our website, but it still seems like there's a lot of detail that's pretty not accessible at the moment. So I guess, when we looked at this and we looked and thought about all the different school districts in Pennsylvania, like this proposal has benefits for every district in the entire Commonwealth. So school districts that are most harmed by this unconstitutional state funding, they're going to receive really substantial adequacy investments that are going to begin to close their funding gaps, or investments that also recognize some of these school districts that have taxed themselves at a very, very high rate to reach adequacy, but only are at adequate funding because they are taxing their communities at such a high rate. We see that districts that have declining enrollment, that they would benefit from this hold harmless to have their base reset. And that would provide them stability moving forward. It takes away the threat from these school districts that if someday somebody would redistribute funding through the formula, and that they could have their hold harmless funding taken away. So even if these school districts aren't seeing huge increases in the funding they get, the fact that they get their base reset is a really, really big deal for them moving forward. And then cyber charter funding reform that would return $262 million to all school districts, and that would help keep these cyber charter costs in control moving forward, would just be a massive benefit to school districts. Every single school district would benefit from that. And so I just thought I would read the top lines from our School Funding Coalition Pennsylvania Schools Work, our press release, and I'm just going to read it out loud because I think this really sums up how we feel about this budget. This is an education budget worth fighting for. Shapiro proposal puts PA on the path toward adequate, equitable, and constitutional public school funding. And these are the things. The state legislature must embrace the governor's public school funding proposal. It must codify a concrete timeline for constitutional compliance, which means that we need to see that this is just the first of 7 years. And so if we want to get to constitutional compliance, we need to see these increases every year for 7 years. And on top of that, we need to ensure that the legislature will reject private school vouchers. So Governor Shapiro, to his credit, did not put a line item in this budget for vouchers. But he did say in his budget address, and I'll also read this out loud, and look, one of those conversations will need to be about scholarships that let poor families in struggling school districts put their kids in the best position for them to succeed, whether that's paying for extra tutoring, books and computers, or yes, going to another school. The Senate passed a proposal last year that included important elements of that, and it's something that I support and consider to be unfinished business. I'm grateful House Democratic leadership has committed to examine and seriously consider this proposal to address the needs of our most at-risk learners. So we've left room for the House and Senate to find common ground on this. So what Governor Shapiro has said is that he's leaving it up to the House and the Senate to work on finding a voucher proposal if they can, right? So when we had Governor Wolf, we knew that if there was a voucher proposal that made it to his desk, he would veto it. I think what this says to us is if there's a voucher proposal, Governor Shapiro is saying that he would be happy to sign it, probably depending on what it looks like. So, we have work to do as advocates to make sure that we talk about what these vouchers are and what they do, because the people who are pushing for vouchers do not talk about what vouchers really are and what they really do. And so we need to talk about a couple things. One, every dollar that's spent on a school voucher reduces funding available to fund public schools. So we have seen Governor Shapiro gave his budget address. Many of us were in the Capitol and we met with lawmakers. Many Republicans had said to us, this is unsustainable. There just isn't enough money. We can't do this proposal. There just isn't enough money. Well, if there isn't enough money to provide constitutional funding for public schools, which is like mandated by the Constitution, then how on earth is there enough money for a voucher program, right? Like, it is the same pot of money, and every dollar that goes to a voucher is a dollar that is unavailable for a public school. And let us not forget, Pennsylvania already has a $490 million a year voucher program, where we send that money to unaccountable discriminatory private schools through the Educational Improvement Tax Credit and Opportunity Scholarship Tax Credit programs. And I just wanted to put a couple slides in here. If you haven't read our report, I really highly recommend that you take a look at it. I'll send an email out tomorrow with a link to it. We looked at schools that are receiving vouchers through the Opportunity Scholarship Tax Credit Program, and we found that every single school that we looked at when we looked at every fourth school on the list, everyone had some type of discriminatory policy, because that is the reason for being for a private school, is that you have the right to pick and choose the students that you want because you are a private institution. So just a couple here that I'm going to throw up here. Many discriminate almost, against students with disabilities. So understand that the school may not be able to meet the needs of the learning disabled children or accommodate students having special needs, that we can't implement existing IEPs. Then we also see really kind of like shockingly discriminatory policies against LGBTQ+ students, including this one from the Dayspring Academy, which is not out of the ordinary. Retains the right to refuse enrollment to and/or to expel any student who engages in sexual immorality, including any student who professes to be homosexual, bisexual, transgender, or is a practicing homosexual, bisexual, transgender, as well as any student who condones, supports, or otherwise promotes such practices. So what we know about private schools is that they pick and choose the students. So when people who are trying to sell this program, it is not families being able to choose the schools. It's the schools choosing students and taking our tax dollars to do it. So what are our next steps? So as I said, the advocates who are part of the PA Schools Work funding campaign, we are united in saying this is a budget worth fighting for, and we are going to spend from now until this budget is passed doing everything we can to get every single dollar across the finish line. So in Harrisburg, the upcoming steps are these Appropriations Committee hearings. So on Wednesday, February 28th, the Senate Appropriations Committee will have a hearing for the Department of Education, and the Appropriations Committee members get to ask questions, both in the House on the March 5th, and in the Senate on February 28th. They ask questions, and then they get their answers, and then they go back, and the House and the Senate, they go into their caucuses and they determine their priorities, and then they start negotiating. And this whole budget is going to be a negotiation between the Pennsylvania House, which has a one-person Democratic majority, the Pennsylvania Senate, which is led by Republicans, and Governor Shapiro. And so, there's a lot that happens behind those closed doors, but what we need to make sure is that outside of that building, we are talking about this budget. We are talking about what it would mean for children. We are talking about what it would mean for communities. And we are letting people know that this is really, truly this is a once in a generation opportunity to get this type of down payment into our schools and to take this first step toward having a constitutional funding system where all kids are going to have what they need. I mean, this could mean thousands of teachers in classrooms where there are kids who have 30 kindergartners and no aid. Those types of classrooms in school districts that are so underfunded could see a huge infusion of dollars that would allow them to hire additional aides, hire additional teachers and counselors and nurses, and get the people, the trained professionals in buildings that these children have been denied for a very, very long time. So we need to help our communities understand these benefits. So if you're wondering what you can do, the first thing that we should all be doing is telling our state lawmakers, just contacting them and asking them to support this budget, right? Like, number one thing, easy phone call to make to tell them to do that. We are soon with PA Schools Work going to have a resolution that people can take to their school board meetings and ask your school board or your local municipal government or your school foundation board or your United Way. It will be a resolution in support of Governor Shapiro's proposed K-12 budget. And this does a few things. It helps your school board members understand what's in the budget and how important it is. It gets people talking about this in a public way so that the numbers that, you know what I mean, the investments that you would see in your community are something that is starting to like make its way out into the common talk. Like this might get reported on in a newspaper. It could just it could help people who are in the audience who are at the school board meeting for something completely different, help them understand like what is at stake. And then also these school board members are elected officials. The resolution is then sent to the lawmakers and to Governor Shapiro. And then that demonstrates to these lawmakers that the people who have been elected by the people in their communities support this budget, right? So we do not have a resolution yet. We had to wait until the budget proposal was finished to be able to do the resolution. So hopefully within the next week and a half, we'll have like a really good program and we'll be able to get resolutions in your hands with good instructions, and you can go forward and go do this and spread the word. You could always just write a letter to the editor in your local paper that is supportive of Governor Shapiro's proposed funding plan. You know, I think the coverage I've been reading lately has been, you know, a lot of the other side saying this is too much money, we can't spend it. What we need to do is make the case that we can't afford not to do this, that our kids cannot afford to continue to go to school in these underfunded schools, especially when Harrisburg has $14 billion that it is just sitting on. And then finally, you can save the date for May 8th with the PA Schools Work Advocacy Day in Harrisburg. It will be a fun day. It'll, you know, as long as it doesn't rain, and even if it rains, we'll have fun. And then moving forward, make sure you read your Ed Voters emails because we will be giving you updates on what is happening and sharing resources as we get those as we go along. So that is the end of this presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people have. So I don't know if there are questions in the chat.
There is one question in the chat, Susan.
Okay. So I see a question that says from Helen's iPad. About 4 weeks ago, Dave Argle's office told me that he's convened a working group to work on House Bill 1422 regarding cyber school funding. Have we heard anything about it? Yeah, you know, he had a working group convened. I hadn't heard about it coming back together recently. I kind of thought they were done. Sandra, do you know anything about that?
No, he had just mentioned at meetings that it was something that he saw still as a priority, but I had not seen if anything came out of that, you know, any kind of report.
So I don't know if I would follow up with him again and ask him how that work group is going. I think that would probably be a good follow-up. So Gilda, obviously you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you. I just had a question about, I'm trying to remember the quote that you said from Shapiro as far as vouchers and trying to entertain. Of course, I know he's been both sides of that, kind of in the middle. And you said that I think you said that he said that to give poor children opportunity. I think it was something along those lines. Did she? But
Yeah.
I don't. What I don't understand, I guess, if you have a lot of poor children, like how do you determine who gets to choose? Right? I mean, I feel like okay, there could be a lot, and who would have the best opportunity? I think the kids who poor children who to give them the best opportunity. Well, that could be all poor children deserve that opportunity. So I don't know I don't understand that part of his argument, I guess. And maybe, and I know he's trying to go in the middle, and I guess my question to that is he leaning more towards the vouchers, or is he leaning more towards equal funding for public school?
Yeah, so I think this budget proposal has made really clear that he is 100% in on this first year investment that was recommended by the Basic Education Funding Commission. So he has solidly proposed that, and he is solidly behind that. And that is something that we need to help make sure we support him in getting across the finish line. However, there is also something that he, for whatever reason, has been really strong on in supporting these vouchers. And it's almost like he wants to have both and. But I think our job as advocates is to say, you really can't have both and. It is really either or, because once you get one of these really small voucher programs in, all we have to do is look to other states. Like Arizona had a little tiny voucher program, which every year their legislature peeled off a little accountability and added a few students and increased the income limit until now they have universal vouchers. And any student in Arizona can get their family can get a $7,000 check per student. People sold a story to their legislature that this would cost $64 million, and this year it costs $900 million, and they're not even out of it yet. And so I think there are a lot of misperceptions, as you said, Gilda. I think you hit it spot on. Like, people try to sell the story about what vouchers are. And I think our job is to really push back very hard against the idea that these vouchers are anything that would be positive for the state of Pennsylvania, and try to just make sure that they do not make it into the budget in June. So, Patricia, I see you have your hand up.
I noted that you said that Shapiro had put in the budget 5 years for the school building for so many millions. What do we know about his attitude toward 7 years for the basic education funding?
That was not put in his budget book as an investment going forward. That was only in his budget book for 1 year. So, I think that in Harrisburg, they tend to do 1-year budgets. And so, I think our job is to get this investment this year and to continue to beat the drum and make the case that we need this investment. We need to have the full Basic Education Funding Commission recommendation. I don't think we've heard any commitment beyond this year, other than the school district, the building money. So.
And you don't see that as something that's worth putting our shoulder to the wheel on, is to demand that happen?
I think that if there are organizations that are willing to do that, I think they absolutely 100% should do that. Yes, I think that should be part of the conversation with him. And I think there are two things that need to happen. One, I think we need to get the Republicans in the Senate right now, who are going to be the roadblock to this budget. I think we need to get them on board with supporting this, because their school districts and their communities would see an enormous benefit from this investment. And then I think the secondary thing is, really helping Governor Shapiro along in understanding that it really also benefits him and the Commonwealth to have the 7-year investment too. So I appreciate that comment.
Pat, in the statement that was sent out by PA Schools Work, we actually use the word codify, and that actually means that when they put out the school code, that they put that into legislative, that it is an expected 7-year investment. So that is something that we feel pretty strongly as an organization, that it has to be in there, because they will not meet compliance. 1 year does not meet constitutional compliance.
Thank you, Sandra.
And I see in the chat, Dr. Donnelly said it might be interesting to hear what the impact of the general fund in Harrisburg has after this budget proposal. So after this budget proposal, I think we would see that we would have an $11 billion surplus after this budget proposal. Isn't that correct, Sandra?
I'm sorry, I was answering the question in chat. What was
I'm
that?
sorry, I think it would be an $11 billion budget surplus after this, if his entire
Correct.
budget was enacted, like not
Correct.
just the education
They'll
part.
only be taking $3 billion out of the surplus, and they believe that the stability of that surplus, due to its location and making actual investment money, that they feel strongly in the budget office, based on conversations that our advocates have had, that it is a substantial enough funding that we'll be able to continue doing that kind of an allocation. Now that continues a robust conversation about our economy and in investing in every time you invest in education and it improves our economy, it improves our economy. So that's part of the argument. But it is only the 3 billion out of the 11.
That was a good question. Yep. Shakita, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I don't think this is a question, it's more of a comment. I think for our district, especially Philadelphia, Philadelphia district, we are definitely scared of money coming down and being misplaced or misused. Can you talk more to like what we can do as advocates to ensure that the money is going directly back to the teachers and students instead of into superintendents' pockets and for their raises?
That is a really good question. And do you want to field that, Sandra, or do you want me to?
Oh, I
I-
was just playing with my hands. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's
I
okay.
can if you want me to. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you do you mind fielding it? Do you
No,
wanna
not at
talk about
all.
the
So
report?
if you read the two BEFC reports, there was a majority report and a minority report. In both of those reports, there was a list of what they felt were appropriate uses for the funds. It gave guidelines. Some people want to call them accountability measures. I think that's not that is a conservative way to put it. But the idea is, and they are supported best practices out of PDE, that money should be going into so that it actually lands into the classroom and it lands into the student need. And we as an organization support the BEFC's very fine delineation of what those funds should be used for.
And we can pull that stuff out and give it to you. And I think that is also something that's really actually worth advocating for. I always think about like the accountability block grant money that goes to school districts that you have to spend on certain things that any school district should be spending money on anyway, like kindergarten teachers, and making sure that you're helping your earliest learners get the smallest class size possible so that they have the best chance, right? So I think, Shakita, I think that's a really good question and really important.
And that list actually is based on the accountability block grant information that PDE puts out for the use of those dollars.
And then Dr., I think it's Notari, I think that's how you say your name. And I know you sent me an email that I never got back to you about, so I apologize for that. And you have a question that says, how do we advocate for those districts that this new proposal doesn't do enough for? Is there a place where we can see all 500 school districts broken out comparatively and then be able to show our local government officials that there actually is still more work to do and that this isn't a one-off cure-all, that it's a step up a larger ladder? And I think that we have spreadsheets that we can send out that show the increases for each school district. And then PA Schools Work also has fact sheets that I'll include those that show your relative ranking in terms of per student spending and in terms of your local tax effort, that I think can be really helpful in making a case for a school district where it seems like you might have had a school board for a long time that didn't want to raise taxes and that felt like students could do with whatever they had. And then, your state funding wasn't adequate and now you're in a situation, and this is a lot of school districts, it's a lot of school districts that are around me too in the Cumberland and Franklin County areas, where you're kind of so far behind and you have so little for your students that it's really hard to get caught up. And that school districts that have not maybe raised taxes and maybe do actually have a pretty low property tax effort, that there is a case to be made that they need to do more on the local level. And so I think that we have materials that can show you relative rankings that might be able to help make that case. And I will send you an email and I would love to talk to you more about that offline too. And if you have more questions, you can also pop off and ask them too.
Hi, Susan. This is Karen Lyons. How are you?
I'm good, Karen. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm so sorry I missed Wednesday night's meeting because that's my board meeting. But I have a question. I listened to the recording from Wednesday night's meeting, and I'm just thinking with Pittsburgh Public Schools proposing to close schools, with the funding, how do you think that will correlate to maybe give them some incentive not to close schools? I mean, they're basing proposed closures on capacity, yet this will obviously impact the families and the students, of course. But do you think that Pittsburgh Public Schools is in that bucket of schools that need the funding, to enhance the school district so that maybe they don't close schools? I'm just thinking out loud here, like, how could we entice them not to do this
So
based
I
off of
don't,
the proposed budget?
yeah, I did see that, I looked today in Pittsburgh's cyber charter savings are $13 million, which is, I don't know what your budget deficit is in Pittsburgh this year that they're trying to close, where they're looking at closing buildings. Pittsburgh is not a district that gets an adequacy supplement because you are one of those declining enrollment districts where you've lost a huge number of students, over a relatively short period of time. And so, I think that this would offer Pittsburgh a lot of stability in knowing if the base gets reset and knowing that you're not going to have to worry about any kind of loss of funding moving forward. And the cyber charter savings are substantial, but I am not 100% sure like what the budget deficit is that Pittsburgh is facing, where they are wanting to start to close schools. And it just, once you close a school, it's a really hard thing.
It's it's going to be devastating if it goes through. But thank you. I was just wondering, I sort of know the status of Pittsburgh Public Schools, but I don't want to speak to the budget deficit. It just doesn't. The number just is not really the shining or the glowing reason. It's just the capacity that they keep throwing out there, and maybe it ties into some sort of funding, but say that and not capacity. And that's why I was hoping with some hope with the budget proposal that maybe they'll say, you know what, maybe we can do this or do that and prevent these closures. But so okay, thank you, Susan.
Yep, thank you. We have Sarah. Oh, Beth, do you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, how does, talking about the cyber situation, how does 1422, Joe Cerisi's bill is going to go to the Senate? How does that affect what we're talking about? How does that change the picture?
So, I think that there is ultimately going to be a negotiation that happens that's going to determine if and what type of cyber charter reform there could be this year. And so this is Governor Shapiro's proposal is just one proposal, which addresses the regular education funding rate, but does not address the special education funding rate. And Representative Cerisi's bill addresses both. And so I think that now what's going to happen is the House and Senate are going to have to negotiate about where they want to land on this. And yep, so.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Sarah had a question. I've heard that the proposed budget includes no tax increases because it depends on the legalization of marijuana and raising the minimum wage to pay for increased spending. Does the surplus go down to 11 billion if those two things don't get approved, or in combination with those two changes in revenue? That is a question I cannot answer. I'm sorry. I'm not sure about that. I can check though and find out. So I'm not 100% sure of their revenue assumptions with the new taxes. There were new taxes on gaming too. I think that the marijuana and the gaming taxes in this particular budget that were pretty minimal, but I can check for you. And Ardith said, I assume that PSEA supports this, so shouldn't that have a lot of influence in the Republicans in the Senate? I would think so, right? Like, I think there are going to be Republicans in the Senate who are going to want to support this. So those are all the questions that I see in the chat. Are there any other questions that people have or that you'd like to ask tonight before we sign off? Well, I mean, I have to say, having, Sandra's been in this a lot longer than I have, but I have to say this is one of the best, most exciting budget years that we have ahead of us. We have so much to fight for. And then we also have so much to fight against with the vouchers, but we can do both things at the exact same time without any kind of problem. And I think that we can get to the end of June or probably beginning of July and find that we have like a really big win for kids, because it is an election year this year. And like, who does not want to take back to their school district a ton of money that your schools can use to hire a bunch of teachers and to keep your school district from having to raise taxes, right? So I'd love to leave on a really positive note, and I will send out tomorrow like an email that will have like spreadsheets and a whole bunch of links and everything in it so that you can have everything. And as Sandra said, the civil rights issue of our generation, and we're all working together. So yep. So thank you, everybody. I hope you all have a good night. Thanks for giving us some of your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.